Good afternoon. Hi, I'd like to welcome you all to the Lafayette Library and Learning Center. My name is Sarah Blumenfeld, and I am the Development and Program Director for the Foundation. The Lafayette Library Foundation raises over 52% of the operating budget for the library. It's what keeps the doors open 7 days a week with our wonderful professional staff, the great resources, and close to 1,000 programs a year like today. It's through our generous donors and the Friends of the Lafayette Library, which raises money through a used bookstore at the corner here, that we're able to do the great work that we do for the community. And your $5 donation makes a difference as well, so thank you for that, and I hope that you will continue to support the Lafayette Library in the future. Before we get started, just two quick notes. One is to silence your cell phones, please, for our guests. We will be recording today's program, and so that is one of the reasons we'll be using question cards, which will allow us to capture the questions for everyone to hear and give our guests a chance to kind of curate them. So I will have people going through the aisles. We do have some pens. If you have some questions, feel free to raise your hand and write out a question card. This afternoon, our guests are Eliza Sherman and Dr. Janella Chin. They are the co-authors of Cannabis and CBD. Eliza Sherman is the author of 12 books and the co-founder of Elementa, the fastest-growing global women's network focused on health, wellness, and cannabis. Elementa connects women to cannabis experts and quality cannabis-related products and services. She's been featured in People, Time, USA Today, and Newsweek named her one of the top 10 people who matter the most on the internet in 1995. Dr. Janella Chin practiced medicine in California for over a decade. She specializing in osteopathic manipulative medicine, nutrition, and medical cannabis. She's currently living and treating patients in New York City. Dr. Chin has been an advocate for better understanding of the science and medicine of marijuana and is profiled for her work in St. Jude's Medical, Fordham University Business School, New York Hall of Science, Huffington Post, USA Today, and NBC Today. Please join me in welcoming Eliza Smith and Dr. Janella Chin.
Hello, Lafayette. I'm Eliza Sherman, by the way. It's a lifelong thing. I'm always like, no, Eliza, no, Eliza, no, Eliza. And I'd love to take a photo of you lovelies. And this is just for our personal thing. We will not put it on social media because I know some of you do not want to be on Facebook. So if you don't mind, is that okay? Maybe a little wave, a little smile. Hello, hello everybody. And you know what? If you all wave again, I want to do a quick little video. This is just proof that you're here, that we're here with you. So here we go. And greetings, everybody. Hi, Lafayette. Yahoo! All right. I'm in charge of the social media. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to see all of you. We like to start off telling a little story. Each one of us has a story in the beginning of our book, which explains how and why we came to cannabis. And I think you might find something that you can relate to in our story. And we also have our first question. So hopefully if you have questions, you're filling out the card and passing it up. This is how we're going to be taking our questions today. So thank you for those who are already sending their questions in. The place I'd like to begin is in 4th grade. I had a science fair project called Close Encounters of the Worst Kind. And it was all about how marijuana is a gateway drug to heroin. Because that's what we were taught. And some of us are still being taught that, but it is not true. And we're here to explain why and how it's not. But back then, I had this science fair project, and I won honorable mention. And when I had gone to the library, because, it was pre-internet, and I would open the textbooks, this is what they said. So this is what I believed. Now, fast forward to high school. All right, I did dabble a little. College, okay, I did have that really bad experience with a pot brownie. And anyone who's had a bad experience understands this was not using it as medicine. This was being a crazy kid thinking, oh, let me try that. And I didn't really use it after that. Fast forward to being 51 years old, in menopause, insomnia, and chronic pain in the neck from all this. Years of this messes up this. I was in pain, I was sleepless, I was irritable. If any of you are living with chronic pain or insomnia, you know how this affects everything. Quality of life, down. Relationships, messed up because you're biting everyone's head off. You just cannot deal. I learned about cannabis from another woman. Cannabis as medicine. I learned about vaping, the inhaling of warmed vapor, not smoke, but vapor, to take in the cannabis medicine. I decided to try it one night. I woke up the next morning and I cried. Not from pain, not from the sleepless, groggy, horrible feeling, but because I finally had relief. I had slept through the night pain-free. My next thought was, why don't more people know about this? I wanted to shout it from the rooftops. Instead, I was able to write a book about it, and I was able to bring Dr. Junella Chin on board on this project to share with as many people as possible the research, the information, the science, the botany, the history of cannabis. When I asked June if she would write this book with me, I had heard so much about her. I had seen her online, in the media, and I was crossing my fingers, and she said, yes. We met for the first time last week. We wrote this whole book collaborating through the internet, Skype, phone, Google Docs, Word docs. It worked. And this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. June, would you share your story, how you came to cannabis?
Absolutely. So before I begin, I always like to start off the talk just by a show of hands. How many of you have asked your healthcare practitioner about medical cannabis for yourself or a loved one? Wow, that's 80% of the room. That's wonderful. So my story is, I was a patient before I even became a physician. When I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with a terrible arthritic disease of the spine called ankylosing spondylitis, or AS. What ends up happening to your spine is you lose mobility at a very, very young age. The spine starts to crazy glue together, literally. You can't flex, you can't extend, you can't rotate. And the bones actually fuse. So it's not just stiffness, but the bones fuse together. So you have nerve pain, you have arthritic pain. So I spent my life in and out of hospitals, in and out of clinics, narcotics, physical therapy, hydrotherapy, acupuncture, massage, muscle relaxants, epidurals, you named it, I tried it. When I got to medical school, I had worn a back brace, a really big back brace, and I would tighten it as hard as I could so I could stand while doing rounds, while sitting in class and studying, and I had a really, really, really hard time. I was in San Francisco in medical school, and this was shortly after they legalized medical cannabis. An attending pulled me aside, and he said, "What's going on? Why do you wear this back brace all the time? You're clearly in a lot of pain." And I expressed how disheartened I was. Here I was, surrounded by great medical minds, but no one could help me. I had hundreds of doctors at my disposal, but all they could offer me was the same prescription medications or an antidepressant, a muscle relaxant, nothing I could take while being in school because it always made me feel groggy and it clouded my thoughts. He handed me a bottle of tincture. Now, he was an HIV and AIDS physician, and he said, this really helps with my patients with chronic pain. This is marijuana. I freaked out. Here I am, a med student, an Ivy League graduate. I'd never tried cannabis before. And he gave me, my mentor, a bottle of marijuana. He said, you take it at night, it really won't make you high. He didn't call it CBD oil at that time. He just said this was a different type of plant, and my HIV and AIDS patients use it. So I tried it, because at this point it was either try something or drop out of medical school. I did it on a weekend when I wasn't on call, and by Monday morning I knew it was working. I had felt like it was the end of the world. It was all consuming me with this pain. And this one tincture, which smelled awful, really, it smelled like wet dog and grass, but it worked. And I decided to dedicate my entire career on learning about this herbal medicine and how to help patients integrate it with their current prescription medication, with their current care. Now, I've been in practice for over 20 years. I started practicing in California, but I didn't learn about cannabis in medical school at all. It's not taught now. And why isn't it taught?
It might be illegal. June asked a good question. How many of you have asked your physician about cannabis? And about 80% raised their hand. Now, how many of you who have asked have gotten a really good answer? Uh-huh.
That's it.
And this is why, because it's not being taught. So part of what June does is educate physicians, going into hospitals. And a lot of June's clients, you've told us, come from hospitals because they can't talk about it. So it's a very convoluted system, and we, as the potential patients, as the consumers, are sort of caught in the middle. Our goal here today, our goal with this book, our goal with the work we do, is to put information into your hands that is well-researched, that is credible and accurate, that is the best information we can find, so that you can take charge of your health, so that you can find the doctor who's willing to talk to you about it, because they are out there. Often, it's more of a naturopath who is open to alternative medicines, plant medicine, and by the way, cannabis is plant medicine. I'll talk a little bit about some of the first things that are in the book, and then I've got another question for you. But first, our book begins with history, and something that all of us need to understand is that the history of cannabis did not start in the 20s and the 30s as cannabis or marijuana was being vilified. The history of cannabis started back in ancient times, and cannabis has been used in spiritual rituals. It has been used for centuries by women, by midwives, to take care of women from the beginning of their pregnancy throughout labor and postpartum. It was a healing plant that was being used to lift mood. It was being used to relieve pain, to cure insomnia, and sure, some people were using it simply for the pure enjoyment of the euphoria, the high, that you could also get from this plant. And by the way, if you think about laughter, the giggles, enjoying and relaxing, isn't that healthy? Isn't that wellness? How many of you know what the endocannabinoid system is? All right. Well, here you go. I promised June I was going to keep this definition short. This is always the challenge because this is the science part of the program. And it's not the science that you learned in 5th grade science class. It's a science that we should have learned. You know about your digestive system, your immune system, the nervous system, the respiratory system, the reproductive system. I mean, our body is made up of all kinds of systems. There is one system that was more recently discovered, which is one of the reasons why many people don't know about it yet. But it's called the endocannabinoid system. Endocannabinoid, endo inside of the body, cannabinoid referring to molecules, chemicals that we naturally produce as humans, as mammals. One is called anandamide, known as, by scientists, known as the bliss molecule. Now, if anyone out there likes dark chocolate, if it gives you a really good feeling, it's because chocolate has cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids. It comes from a plant, the cacao plant. And those chemical compounds in chocolate interact with this system, this endocannabinoid system, and releases the anandamide, which is bliss. And exercise, we always hear, oh, when you exercise, you get really that almost a euphoric high, that energized feeling. Well, that is also stimulating your endocannabinoid system and releasing the anandamide as well. But when you're depressed, when you're feeling low energy, when you're off balance and just stressed out, your anandamide level drops. Well, besides dark chocolate, cannabis can raise the anandamide levels for you. And that's why you can feel good with it. Now, the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, kind of like all the systems in our body, has all these receptors. And the 2 receptors that you're going to hear about, and you'll read about in our book, are CB1 and CB2. CB2 is in our immune system mostly, and CB1 is everywhere else. These receptors receive the chemicals from the plants we eat. So if you've ever smelled lavender and you're like, so relaxing. Well, lavender contains a chemical compound called linalool, and so does cannabis. Myrcene is another chemical compound in mango. It's also in cannabis. When you begin to think about plants and foods we eat, fruits and vegetables, they contain these chemical compounds that interact with our body. Sometimes you eat something and it makes you feel great. Sometimes you eat something and it makes you feel lousy. It's because plants, fruits, vegetables have phytocannabinoids. The other thing, endo in our body, phyto in plants. So cannabinoids, you're going to hear a lot about that. THC is the one you know about most, the one that gets you high, and CBD is the one we're all hearing about now, the one that doesn't get you high, but can actually help with inflammation. We'll go into a little bit more of this, but June, can you talk a little bit about terpenes?
So terpenes, and you touched upon that. Terpenes are found in plants, and they give cannabis that pungent odor. So a lot of times people mistake the smell of cannabis to be the THC of what gets you high, but it's really the terpenes. And the different plants, the different strains of the cannabis plant have different terpenes, and that dictates how the body is going to be affected. So terpenes like myrcene, which is also found in mangoes, are very sedating. They make you really sleepy, they help you relax. They take away anxiety and panic. And that's a great strain. if you're looking to treat insomnia. Another terpene is limonene, which is found in citrus plants. It's not an accident that you walk down the supermarket and you smell this lemony fresh scent and it's uplifting and energizing. So the limonene in cannabis strains will give you energy. And a lot of times patients will use it during the daytime for energy, for mood, for clarity. So you see the cannabis plants have a lot of different terpenes. How many terpenes?
I've heard hundreds of terpenes.
Hundreds of terpenes.
And then over 113 cannabinoids: THC, CBD, CBN, CBG, CBC, THC. I can't name them all.
And they all work together.
Yeah.
All of these plant compounds work together synergistically. And what they do is helps you as an anti-inflammatory, anti-muscle spasm, anticonvulsant, antidepressant, anti-tumor properties, and it also helps with the digestive system. Now, what I'm asked all the time is this has got to be snake oil. Why does it work for so many different things, from a seizure patient to my Parkinson's patient to someone with Crohn's disease? And it's because these receptors, these galaxy of receptors, are all over the entire body. Your adipose tissue, your fat tissue, your lymphatics, your immune system, the reproductive organs. It's the largest receptor system in the brain. So if we forget about cannabis for just one moment, I don't understand why we wouldn't study the largest receptor system in our brain.
That is a very good point. So this is the science part where we didn't learn it. It sounds unfamiliar, and like you said, it sounds like snake oil or too good to be true. Sometimes I feel like I'm in an infomercial for the Ginsu knife. It slices, it dices, it makes Julian fry. I mean, it really sometimes feels that way. But then you read the reports, the studies, the research. When people say there's no research about that, there's not enough, well, there's never enough research, but there is a lot of research out there. Just not a lot necessarily in the United States, but there are many other countries that are allowed to research cannabis, Israel in particular, and you will find a lot of studies, and studies not just with mice. But another interesting thing for a government that has banned this plant for decades, you can find links to a lot of the really good studies on US government sites. And that's actually, in the back of our book, we cite many of the studies that we went through, that June went through as a doctor. I would find them and I said, I think this explains what the point we're trying to make, and then she would go through and vet it. But we had so many studies in here that it took up too many pages, and our publisher literally said, can you cut down the list of studies? So actually, we should publish the rest of that list online, because we spent months combing through all of it. So when people say there's not enough study out there, there's not enough research out there, it is not true. There is research, and there's research to show that cannabis or compounds within cannabis, usually these cannabinoids, can be incredibly effective for various conditions that we have. And by the way, it's not just human beings or even mammals that have an endocannabinoid system. So your dog, your cat, if you have horses, they have an endocannabinoid system. Some reptiles and birds, this is living beings, have this system. That's why you can give something like CBD to your pet, not THC, but CBD. It's because they have a receptor system. Don't give them a human dose. Speak to a naturopathic veterinarian who can help you on dosing. But again, this is not what we've been told. And sometimes it's a little bit hard to fathom that any of this can be true, but there is proof. How many of you are dealing with chronic pain? How many of you have insomnia? How many of you have dealt with cancer? How many of you have caregiven for a loved one who's been ill? Pain, sleeplessness, chronic illness, acute illness, it touches all of our lives. I mean, this is the human condition. But what has happened over the decades is that a natural plant medicine was made illegal not because it was dangerous, but because a few people in power positions, not just in our government, but also very wealthy individuals, banded together to make sure this plant no longer could see the light of day. Back in the day, before my time, like around the 1800s, it was in every medicine chest, the cannabis tonic, and they might not have been able to explain back then why it made people feel good, but it was being used even in the United States until the three wealthiest men, DuPont, Hearst, and
Anslinger?
no, Anslinger's from the government. I do this all the time. Menopause. DuPont, Hearst, and Rockefeller.
Oh, Rockefeller.
Come on, you know Rockefeller, wealthy, but the three of them put their money behind a propaganda campaign to convince Americans that this plant was dangerous. And they attached it to Mexican immigrants. That's where the marijuana came in. Bringing it across the border, ruining our land, our world, our people by bringing this evil plant. They came out with a movie called Reefer Madness. Oh, you're going to go crazy. You're going to kill people. And none of this was true. So our job, our mission is to go out there and talk about the facts and to demystify this plant. I would love to have some of the questions up here so we can really begin to address where you're coming from and what your needs are. Because we have a doctor in the house, I have to say, disclaimer, she is not prescribing anything for you. And anything we say here is not a personal recommendation that you should take as your guide. It's wonderful to have this kind of information as food for thought, to go to your physician and have more information. Another thing, before we begin with answering some of these questions, June, if you could explain how and why this medicine is so individual.
Okay. So when we're dealing with cannabis, we still have to remember this is a plant-based medicine. So with any plant-based medicine, it's very individualized. There's a very broad therapeutic window. When you take your prescription medication, like diabetes or high blood pressure, it's a very narrow therapeutic window. So you see your physician, they prescribe something for insulin for glucose, and you'll know when you come back in a month, your sugar levels will improve, will drop, or will stay the same. Same thing with your high blood pressure. Maybe it'll change by 1 or 2 milligrams, but they stay within a very narrow therapeutic window. When you're working with a plant-based medicine, it depends on your metabolism. It depends on your own endocannabinoid system. Are you deficient in anandamide? Patients with chronic pain, cancer, epilepsy, ADHD, Tourette's, autism. Patients have a deficiency in their own anandamide levels. So when you take the cannabis plant, it replenishes that deficiency. So you have to know, well, how low am I in my own anandamide levels? So it's very, very individualized. So that's why it's important when you are working with the cannabis plant is to work with your healthcare practitioner, but also to check in with yourself. You keep a journal, you keep track of the symptoms, you keep track of what type of cannabis plant you're taking, at what time, and how you're feeling. So really, this plant gives you your health back in a way that you can control it, which is very different when you go to your physician's office and you're waiting for a prescription, and then you go back passively in a month and you see what the results are. You can really take charge of your health with this plant-based medicine. Now, it doesn't work for everyone. It's not a silver bullet. There are plenty of patients that do very poorly on cannabis medicine. There are patients that it doesn't work for at all. But this can potentially eliminate 5 to 6 different medications for a lot of my patients. An anti-nausea medication, it's an appetite stimulant, it uplifts your mood, and it helps you sleep and relax, and it takes away pain and inflammation. So think about when you're given a medication for pain, you're often given something else to combat the constipation that you get from that pain reliever. And then you are given another medication to combat the nausea that you feel or the decrease in appetite. So those medications add up very, very quickly, especially for my elderly patients. So when you're on 4 to 5 different medications, it can start to affect your memory, right? So this is why I teach my colleagues about cannabis medicine, is because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But it's really up to healthcare practitioners. It's our responsibility to be able to educate our patients about the pros and the cons. Let's take a look at our questions.
Well, this one I think dovetails nicely with what you were speaking about, and I'm starting to feel like Oprah now. So, Dr. Chin, does cannabis negatively interact with any medication, and is there something you should never take it with?
That's a great question. So any herbal medicine, whether it's echinacea, vitamin C, St. John's wort, you want to space out medication and natural supplements at least 2 to 3 hours apart. Your liver metabolizes these medications and these supplements, so you want to space it out apart so it gives your body time to metabolize it all. There are certain medications that do interact with cannabis. Blood thinners, so if you've had a history of stroke or cardiac issues, it makes the blood thinner work even better. So you want to make sure that you tell the doctor, so they're testing your INR levels when they test your clotting ability, to make sure that you might need to lower your blood thinner medication. Blood pressure medications interact. Cannabis can really drop the blood pressure, or it can make your heart beat very fast. So you want to be careful there. Certain antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications also interact.
Good information. So we have a couple of insomnia questions. I did see a lot of hands go up around the insomnia. What form and dosage would you suggest for a first-time user for insomnia?
So it really actually depends if you're a male or a female. Females react very differently to cannabis compared to males. And it's because of our estrogen levels, or lack of estrogen. Estrogen makes women very sensitive to the THC portion of the cannabis plant. So just as a quick review, CBD and THC are the 2 major players of the cannabis plant. THC gives you that relaxing, sedating, high feeling, and CBD does not, but it is also an anti-anxiety and anti-relaxant. So my female patients need very, very little cannabis to start off with because of the hormonal changes. Then also there's, again, metabolism, right? Your liver, it depends on your other disease states. Do you have diabetes? Do you have thyroid issues? So all these you have to be taken into account.
This is a little bit along the same line. What ratio or percentage of THC to CBD is the most effective for sleep?
What ratio? So again, this really depends. It's patient dependent. Some patients are very sensitive to CBD. In general, CBD is energizing. So CBD is usually taken during the daytime. You can drive safely with it. I take CBD, I go to work, I drive my children around, because there are no psychotropic effects. You don't feel high with it. The THC can be added towards the evening hours because it's relaxing. So a 50-50 ratio, 1-to-1, can be a very effective way to start as a safe way, and then you can slowly add the THC higher in ratio if it doesn't work.
So a couple of things. Psychoactive. People always say, oh, CBD is not psychoactive. And they think that means it doesn't get you high. But all of the cannabis plant cannabinoids and even some of the terpenes are potentially psychoactive, meaning it does affect your brain. It just happens that CBD can have neuroprotective qualities. CBD can protect your brain, but it is interacting with your brain. It can also affect the way that THC binds to the receptors in your brain. So whereas THC is psychotropic, it does distort your perception, it does affect the way you're thinking and perceiving things. The CBD can come in and kind of block it or modify the way that it's affecting your brain. So all of it is psychoactive, but THC is psychotropic. Not all cannabinoids, not all of these chemical compounds are psychotropic. So that's really some of the language that we have learned that affects the way we talk about cannabis. So cannabis and CBD can affect your brain, but in pretty positive ways.
And some patients get sleepy with CBD.
Right.
So if your spouse can take CBD and go run errands, but when you take it, it just knocks you out, it's because you're very sensitive to it. And then I can't take CBD during the day.
And people also say, I take CBD for sleep, and wow, it's so good. But it's really not meant for sleep. What it does is that anti-anxiety piece. So what it does is take away that racing brain, that panicky, anxious feeling that sometimes you get before you try to get to sleep. And then it's the THC, even a little bit of THC, that can help you continue your sleep. So here's another one. And this is a little bit specific, but I think we're starting to answer it. This person started to take CBD, got immediate relief, but then began waking up at 3:30 or 4 in the morning, but used to wake up at 5 in the morning. And so I was wondering, what's up with that, and what could they do differently?
Yeah. So there's different methods of taking cannabis plant. You can take it in a tincture or an oil. You can use a vaporizer, inhaled form, or a traditional pipe or a pre-roll where you're burning the plant. There's sprays that you can use, and there's edibles that come in the form of capsules or gummies or chocolates. The great thing about California is you guys have so much choices. So much choices. It's
And you could
really
just walk into
overwhelming.
a store and buy them.
So when you're trying to use it for insomnia, you have to ask yourself, am I having trouble falling asleep, or am I having trouble staying asleep? When you have trouble falling asleep, you want to take something that's fast-acting, right? So you take something, within a half an hour, you want your body to begin to shut down and to begin to quiet your thoughts. And you can get a fast-acting cannabis formula through the vaporizer, so vaping, or an inhaler. They make little albuterol-looking inhalers if you don't want to combust anything. You don't want to provide a heat element, and you just want to spray. There's a tincture as well, fast-acting tinctures. There's strips, there's mints.
There's breath spray or just oral sprays. There's nasal mists, where you just bring it into your mucous membranes in your sinus cavities.
Yep, and it'll work within half an hour. Then you follow that. If you're having trouble 3 a.m., you're waking up, then 4 a.m., and then you get anxious because you gotta go to work, you want to take something that will kick in later but last you through the night, which is what an edible comes in. or a capsule form. Now, edibles are tricky. If you're eating a gummy or a brownie or some sort of chocolate, it's not easily as dosed as an actual capsule. And they make great capsules that are scored as well, so you can cut them in half if they're too strong. But those capsules take 1 to 2 hours to kick in, and then they last 6 to 8 hours. So the capsule or the edible will really help you stay asleep through the night. So you can do both very safely.
And actually, I'll just tell you that is what has helped me. I didn't have a lot of trouble falling asleep, but I had a lot of trouble staying asleep. It was the 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., hello. So what I ended up doing was taking a few puffs from a vaporizer, a vape pen, just a few puffs. That's all I needed, and that just settled and relaxed. Then I took an edible. Up in Alaska, they have buttermints. They have gluten-free treats. I don't always like to take the sugar, so a capsule or a tablet is a really great solution too, and that kept me from waking up until it was time to wake up. And then I would not wake up groggy. But for me, I tried a tincture with THC thinking, that's going to be really effective. And I woke up feeling very out of sorts, very groggy, and realized that either I have to take less or maybe that's just not the right form for me. And I think that's something back to that plant medicine. You try a little more, not in the same day. Don't do the mistake of, I hate that cookie, nothing happened, let me have another one. But you try a little more the next day and a little more until you start to feel, that's not right, back off, and you begin to find your body's natural needs from this plant. There's a couple of really good questions about specific conditions, and if you could maybe touch a little bit on them. It says, what effect does CBD have on glaucoma? But I'll also just touch on cannabis in general.
So because cannabis is such a great anti-inflammatory, it works actually very well for eye health. It can decrease the pressure for glaucoma patients, and it's more effective than steroids. So oftentimes we're given steroid eye drops to work locally, but when you're taking the cannabis plant, it's systemic anti-inflammatory. So it can be really, really effective for glaucoma. A lot of my patients will find, my elderly patients, that they only need a quarter of the suggested dose. A quarter of the suggested dose. And I really can't stress that enough. You start small, almost till you can't feel anything, and you give it a week, and then you can titrate up the following week, because there's no rush. If you feel uncomfortable, that will scare you off and you won't want to try it again. You want your body to acclimate slowly to the plant-based medicine.
How is using CBD for easing nocturnal leg cramping, which for this person was caused by spine-induced neuropathy? Leg cramping, neuropathy, CBD, cannabis in general? So
nerve pain, neuropathy, is actually the most researched with the cannabis plant. Over 71% of the peer-reviewed studies show that it's helpful for nerve pain. And this is nerve pain from spinal discs. This could be nerve pain post-chemo, radiation. This could be nerve pain from diabetes, that fiery, burning pain, the restless leg, where you just feel like the sheet itself on the bed sends shooting pain up your body. A great ratio that works for my nerve pain patients is a 1-to-1 ratio, because you do need a little bit of the THC and the CBD. Again, they work synergistically for the nerve pain.
So that's another thing I definitely want to repeat and emphasize. CBD by itself can be extracted from the plant. Currently, the legal CBD that can be federally legal is derived from the industrial hemp plant. So when you see hemp-derived CBD, it means the CBD is derived from a cannabis sativa plant that happens to be low resin, low THC. Don't be fooled. CBD comes from cannabis, but it's like a sister or a cousin plant to the plant that generates the flowers and everything that might get you high. So CBD can be isolated. They call it an isolate, a CBD isolate. That means there's nothing else in there. There's not the other cannabinoids or the terpenes or the natural plant chemistry that works so well with our bodies. That means it's isolated. The benefit of that could be more precise dosing. But when we talk about something like the whole plant or full spectrum CBD, and it's coming from the plant that also generates your THC products, then you'll find it in a dispensary, but that means it has just a little bit more THC, and it makes the CBD more effective. So it's not that CBD isolate is completely ineffective. That is not true, but the true power comes from them working together. The opposite thing is, because the CBD can temper the THC, if ever you feel too high, you had too much THC and whoa, I don't like the feeling, have some CBD on hand. Take that CBD, especially as a tincture, under your tongue, hold it there, and it will bring you down to a more comfortable level pretty quickly. So we're getting into a couple of really good questions here. As a parent, this is a little bit tough sometimes for me to talk about, write about, and have a cannabis company when I've got a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I'm saying to them, just say no right now. That's the new just say no. It's your brain is not fully formed right now. Research shows that the frontal lobe, especially the judgment portion of our brain, is not fully formed until around mid-20s. So I say to them, not now, because it has been shown that cannabis can affect the formation of that portion of the brain if they're using it at such a young age. But I do say, when you hit 25, come see me, because I've got some great advice for you. And that's tough, though, because they see or hear that mom is talking about cannabis. They always say, oh, are you going to that weed event? They know what I'm doing. So being able to communicate openly to your child, regardless of age, in a very fact-based way and an age-appropriate way is so important. And we've got some good questions here related to kids. Would you recommend CBD, Dr. Chin, for a college student with test anxiety and insomnia?
That's a great question. So I do see children in my practice. I see teenagers, I see college students, young adults. When young people come into my office, they are usually very ill. So they're coming in with terrible social anxiety, with ADHD, with Tourette's, with terrible insomnia, where their quality of life is affected. And usually the parents will say to me, they're already using cannabis, or they find that the cannabis is very helpful already. How can we make sure that they're doing the right thing and it's safe? So college students, so they're getting a little older, it's better for them to use CBD first. You can use a little bit of THC if it doesn't get in the way of the studies, so of their academics. So the great thing about the cannabis products here in California is you can get the different ratios of CBD and THC. So you can get what's called the Cbd Dominant Formula. So it's mostly CBD with a touch of THC, and see how that works. Same thing with my younger children. When they come in and let's say the parents find that the antidepressants aren't working or the ADHD medications aren't working, I work with the psychiatrist, psychologist for a more integrative approach, and perhaps we add a little bit of CBD and see if that helps the medication work better, and we can decrease the dosing of that medication, and work with the behavioral therapist as well. So it's very important for young adults and children is that it is an integrative approach. When you have a teenager that uses a lot of cannabis, it's usually because they find it helpful already for something that, that they're struggling with.
They're self-medicating.
They're self-medicating. So the conversation is, well, why are you using it? What does it help you with?
And you mentioned Tourette's. One of the questions, actually, this is the first question that came in, so I wanted to make sure we asked it. My teenage daughter with Tourette's is insistent on trying CBD to help calm her tics. I am resistant because of the lack of scientific studies. There are studies. Help. Can it do harm?
Yes, so that's a great
Yes,
question.
can it do harm?
It can do harm. It can make the tics worse. Most of the time, patients that come to me, young children and teenagers with Tourette's, motor tics, vocal tics, it improves them most of the time. And when you're using other medications for the Tourette's, it's very sedating because the purpose is to shut down the muscle spasm, to shut down the nervous system so it's not so overactive. CBD works to calm the nervous system naturally. It works on GABA receptors in our brain. It shuts off the muscle spasm in a much more natural way by coaxing the body to balance the nervous system. GABA receptors tell our body it's okay, we're safe, we can relax. It helps us sleep. And patients with Tourette's, with motor tics, verbal tics, are deficient in that. And that's why the CBD and THC work well.
Okay. And there's another question about children as well. Can cannabis help my Down syndrome daughter, age 6, help her sleep and be less hyperactive?
So I see a lot of pediatric patients. So half my practice is pediatrics. And I see pediatric patients from autism, from insomnia, from pediatrics that are self-injurious behaviors, putting holes in the drywall, biting mom and dad. Some of them are just having issues with school, with focus, sitting still in class, or being with peers, or even restless, having insomnia at night. And CBD can really help, again, calm the nervous system without making the child feel high during the day, so they can still concentrate on their studies.
And then, is this a forever solution? Is a user going to build up and become addicted to it, or will it actually cure and they'll never need it again?
So that's a great question. And that's the number one question I'm asked in my office, is this addicting? And I always point to the National Institutes of Drug Abuse, NIDA, published this. Cannabis has a dependency rate of 9%, which is the same as a cup of coffee. When you look at cigarettes and alcohol, it's 32 and 46%. When you look at your cell phone, it's 60 to 80% addiction. Right?
So less addictive than your iPhone.
Well, because when you look at your phone, you're getting a dopamine rush. It's like a slot machine, right? So when you look at cannabis dependency rates at 9% in caffeine, that's not saying it's not addictive. There's a code for it, for marijuana abuse. But the dependency rates does not increase in states with medical cannabis laws. And that's really important because most patients that use cannabis never really become heavy users.
So here is another question. Similarly, are there any possible negative effects of cannabis or CBD? Is there any chance THC and or CBD exacerbates depression, anxiety, ADHD, or insomnia?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are patients that they just cannot metabolize the cannabis, and it really does not work well for them at all. Some of my patients get even more depressed with cannabis, or it gives them heart palpitations. Their heart feels like it's going to come out of their chest. Some patients, when they take it, they get terrible diarrhea. So CBD can actually cause diarrhea and nausea. So you have to be very, very careful when taking it. And if it does work, if you are using it, some patients do develop a tolerance. And that was back to the other question. So you might need more and more. My patients that take it regularly, I always put them at about the 3 or 4 month mark at cannabis fast, where they stop taking it and you let your body's own endocannabinoid system adjust. So when you're taking an outside source of cannabinoids through the plant to supplement your own endocannabinoid system, your own endocannabinoid system sort of takes a step back and doesn't produce as much anandamide because you're getting an outside source. And that's why it's important for children with normal endocannabinoid systems not to flood their system with an outside source of cannabinoids, because their body's going to produce less. But if you are ill and you're already down in the tank of your own anandamide levels, supplementing with phytocannabinoids will give you that balance, but sometimes you back off on your own plant cannabinoids so your body can work a little bit. And that's with any natural supplementation. When you're taking echinacea or vitamin C, you want to cycle through the seasons on and off those supplements. You're not taking natural supplementation and vitamins all the time, the same brand all the time.
What is the efficacy of THC and or CBD for treatment-resistant depression?
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
So treatment-resistant depression, I would say that a combination works well, but the CBD gives you that foundation. The CBD is something that you take that helps uplift the mood, but it's very subtle. It doesn't happen right away. Let's say the first week you're taking it, almost nothing happens, day 1 through day 7. But by day 30, it's usually the family members that notice something has shifted. Oh, he's cleaning the garage. Or I notice, he or she's not complaining as much, or not as, somber, or the sleep is better. So it's a very subtle balance of the nervous system. And sometimes it will help with other antidepressants or other anti-anxiety medications as well.
Somebody had asked a question about indica versus sativa. So there are two distinct types of cannabis plants. The indica plant is low to the ground. The sativa plant is much taller, grows much higher, and it's because of the regions where they originally grew. Indica, the plant and the medicine it produces, is known to be very sedating, very relaxing. Indica, as in sinking into the couch. Then sativa is known to be more stimulating, a much more buzzy kind of head high, good for creativity, productivity, focus. And it's hard to get a pure indica and a pure sativa. Even when they say, oh, this is an indica, but they're really saying it's indica dominant. I mean, the seeds, the strains, the cultivation process has been just changed over the decades and over the centuries. So what we're getting today are more hybrids. These hybrids combine sativa and indica, so they might be indica dominant, sativa dominant. And the interesting thing is, depending on your brain chemistry, for example, somebody with ADHD, indica might be stimulating, sativa might be relaxing and sedating. It could actually have a completely opposite effect. So simply going by indica or sativa is not exactly the right way to go. You want to look at everything else in there. The cannabinoids, for example, there was a question about CBN. Is CBN useful? CBN is very sedating. And a lot of new products coming out are really emphasizing the CBN as a sleep aid. But too much CBN can induce that paranoid feeling. So, by the way, when we used to store our pot in little baggies, it was getting air, it was getting light, and that aging and exposure was creating natural CBN. And then we would smoke it and get really paranoid. Well, that paranoia was from the really high levels of the CBN. So this is also an advice to, and this is not doctor's advice, but this is advice to store your cannabis flower in dark, very airtight containers and locked containers if you have someone who might accidentally come upon it. But when you think of all of these products that are out there, once they begin to process the flower into concentrated oils, tinctures, edibles, breath strips, oral sprays, and all the like, the shelf life can increase. A capsule or a tablet will last a lot longer than that flower that you buy. So that's why when you're looking at the products on the shelf at a dispensary, and you're looking for very specific effects, it sometimes is better to go toward a manufactured product versus the flower itself. The flower can still be medicine, but you read and see what cannabinoids are in it, what terpenes are in it. And in our book, we define some of the most popular and most abundant cannabinoids and terpenes. And then we say what they're known to be good for. Some are antiviral and antimicrobial. So they're good for infection.
And you want to make sure that you're looking at trusted third-party tested products. It's still an unregulated market, and there's so many products out there, so many products you can buy online. So when you look at the label, it's like reading the back of a food label. You're looking and seeing if it was tested for any heavy metals, for any solvents. You're looking at pesticide, and you're looking at mold. So when you're a smart consumer, always ask for the certificate of analysis or the COA, and you want to make sure that it's tested properly by a third party.
And that was one, actually, we had several of the same question. How can you make sure you're purchasing a quality product? So it is going to a trusted dispensary. And sometimes the best way is somebody you know and trust, or somebody medical or a professional in the industry who knows and trusts. Ultimately, these dispensaries are licensed. They have tests that they have to pass. They have quality that they must demonstrate. Then they have to get the products in and vet those products. So if they do a good job about that, they're looking at the certificate of analysis, or COA. They're looking to see that third-party testing has been done. On the CBD side, the legal CBD side from the hemp plant, it's not required right now to do testing. And you have to be very careful about the hemp plant because it's a phytoextractor. It pulls heavy metals and all kinds of other chemicals out of the soil. In fact, they planted it in Chernobyl to clean the soil. So this is a plant that pulls things and holds it within the plant. So you want to make sure that whoever's producing that product can prove to you that they've removed any of those heavy metals and pesticides and such. Again, a lot of it has to do with trust. If it's not a regulated industry where they have to prove it to the government and then prove it to you, the companies that really care about you, the consumer, are doing the testing anyway. So these CBD companies find the ones that will do the test and show you the test results. And again, third party, you could call the third party lab or even research that lab to make sure the lab is legit. So we have to be very careful as consumers. We have to be smart consumers. But more than anything, I think our biggest message to you is take charge of your health. Knowledge is your power. The more you know and understand, if your doctor doesn't, find one who does. And how, if somebody doesn't have a doctor who does understand and is willing to talk about it, how could they get professional medical advice?
So every state is like its own island, and it has its own medical cannabis law. So you can go to the Department of Health website for each state, and they will have a list. If there's medical cannabis legalization in that state, they will have a list of certifiable physicians. So you can really vet out those physicians, look them up, call them. How much experience have you had? Would you be able to work with my physician together as an integrative approach? So these are the questions that you should be asking, and frankly, that you deserve. So you can demand this. The more patients ask physicians to learn about it, the more physicians will learn about it.
So it's up to you to really take charge, educate, and arm yourself with the information. This is just the beginning. I mean, we couldn't pack enough into this book. You get a word limit when you're an author. But we really hope that you stay in touch, you reach out to experts, and you go and find the care you need so you can live a better, healthier, and happier life, because we all deserve that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll be outside and happy to sign your books and happy to answer a few more questions. These are all the ones that we didn't get to. So we're ready when you are.